If you are struggling to trust God, especially for the things that He's promised you, you need to stay locked in. This video is for you. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Celisa Renee, and today I'm going to be talking to you about 3 reasons why we struggle so much to trust God, whether it be promises that He's given to us through the Word, or it could be in your personal time with God. Like throughout this video, I'm also going to be sharing with you 3 things that I keep in my arsenal to stand firm while I believe in and trusting God for what it is that He's promised me in my life. I know that this video is for someone. I promise you, I've recorded this video 3 separate times, and it has been struggle and fight. So if you're listening in, you're meant to listen in. If throughout the video you're thinking about someone that this could be beneficial to, please go ahead and share. Hit that share button and go ahead and share it with someone. So many of us have things that we're believing in God for and we're trusting Him for, right? It could be a vision for a business. It could be an idea that He's giving you to impact people. It could be health in your body. It could be, healing from a broken heart or grief that some people are going through. I know for me, I'm believing God for several things in my life, including salvation for family members. And I know a lot of you share that as well. You could also be waiting for your promise of financial stability that you haven't gotten yet, or success in your purpose in life that is still yet to unfold for you. A lot of people are just believing for roof over their head and food on the table. We're in some really challenging times right now, especially today with so much going on. We need to elevate and up our game when it comes to trusting God, believing God, and knowing that He's going to come through on the other side of any challenge that we're going through. So it really could be believing God for any variety of things. Everybody has their own personal promise that they're believing God for or they're hoping for. And so we're looking for this thing to happen, but it's taking too long based on our timeline. We're planning for it. We're excited, but it's just dragging out a little bit too long. Now here comes fear starting to plant seeds in our thoughts. From those fear-based thoughts, doubt starts seeping in. And then from doubt, we start operating from a place of unbelief. Unbelief is the biggest and the number one reason we struggle to trust and believe God for promises in our lives. Because if you think about it, we need belief to be able to operate. Here's something I've come to learn about the enemy. He loves to discredit God. And the number one tactic for doing that is to put suggestions into our thoughts that's going to cause us to pull away from trusting God. We're more focused on what we're seeing rather than what we're believing. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. Because he loves to discredit God, he does so by planting seeds of fear in our thoughts. And one of the biggest attacks is that what God promised is not going to happen in our lives. So this is the area that he fights us on. This is why the battleground is our mind, and this is where he comes to infiltrate so that we don't believe in God for what He says is going to come to pass, because we're looking at the circumstances and the thing that's around us rather than believing in the God that promised us in the first place. Sometimes suggestive thought comes through the minds of other people that are around us. So the enemy may use someone around you because it's a familiar voice. When they talk to you, they now project their fears, their doubts, their unbelief onto you. And because it's a familiar voice and someone that you trust, you listen to it, and now it starts planting these seeds in your thought, in your mind, and then the enemy plays on that. So now we're in this cycle of believing what people are saying and what we're hearing, rather than listening to the very one who created us and planned and ordered our steps in the first place. Now you gotta admit, deceptive thoughts have been a very successful strategy of the enemy for a really long time. Because how many people realize it while it's happening? Most of us don't initially, until we become more sensitive that this is a strategy that the enemy uses. Most people don't pay attention. They just kind of go along and think that this is just something that is happening, right? So he will use every tactic possible to put us in a place where we're functioning and operating from unbelief, especially because belief is the requirement for us to start our faith walk to begin with, right? Salvation was a promise that was given to us. Now, whether we choose to receive it or not, it's totally up to us because we have free will. So if we needed belief and trust to receive Christ as Lord and Savior over our lives, then why wouldn't we need trust and belief to be able to receive the promises that he gave us in our own personal and private time? Whatever the promise is, we need belief to be present so that we can receive it. It is literally how manifestation travels from the unseen realm, which is that spiritual realm, to the seen realm, which is our physical realm that we see every day around us. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. It's so important that we understand that there is a battle going on in our mind and for our mind. Our mind is where we make our decisions from. It is where we feel emotions, where our intellect operates from. Our mind is the place in which we give our bodies directions to do or take action. So it just makes sense why the enemy will attack us in this area. So what do some of these thoughts sound like in our heads? I'm not good enough. I don't deserve it. I messed up. I'm not loved. I don't have what I need to get done, what I need to get done. Does God really love me? What do I have to do to earn God's love? Look how many times I've failed. I have to do something to get something. These are all this negative chatter that comes in our mind. Once that promise is given, we are measuring the result of that promise based on our actions. We're measuring it on human standards of deserving something. And one of the questions that come up for me or has come up for me is, was that really what God said? Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe I didn't hear properly. Maybe I did something to no longer deserve it. These are things that come up in our minds constantly. And so these thoughts come in to derail you from what it is that you're waiting for, what you're looking forward to, what you're believing and trusting God for. So we got to keep in mind that not because we're not seeing something happening in front of our eyes, that God is not doing something behind the scenes in the spiritual realm. I'm going to give you something to put in your arsenal that I use anytime unbelief or doubt or fear starts kind of seeping in. I recognize it. Once I recognize it, I'm like, oh, yeah, we got to deal with this head on. Because if you don't deal with it, what it does, sits and it festers and it grows bigger and bigger. It is hard to come out of that ditch. You know, I always say prevention is better than cure. So if you know or you realize that, you know what, I'm not believing like I should, that you're not trusting, you're not believing, you feel fearful, you have to have a weapon to counteract this attack of the enemy. And so I want to share a little bit about like what that looks like for me. I remember in the beginning of COVID when we were shut down. And because my business at the time depended on clients, if I couldn't see clients, I couldn't make any money, right? So a lot of you can relate to different things that happened during that time. People were furloughed and laid off. People lost their businesses and all these things. My financial resources were going down. And I was living in the state of Arizona. I was pretty new to that state and I was just getting my footing. And so I'm trying to build a business in the midst of COVID. Because I had previously experienced losing everything, that is a tactic that the enemy used to come in. I knew that God promised that he was going to take care of me. I knew that God was saying, hey, depend on me and trust me for your finances. And so he came in with an attack of something I experienced before. So that's another way, another part of that strategy that comes in with suggestion. Something that happens to you before, and because it was painful, he used it to revisit your mind, to take you back into the feeling of what that was when you were going through it. So here I am watching all my finances just getting ate up by what's going on with COVID. I still have to pay all these bills. Nothing was on pause. The enemy comes in with all this suggestive thought about you're going to lose everything all over again. How are you going to make money? You can't see clients. And it was just so heavy. He bombarded my mind. It's like the enemy wants your mind to be flooded with it that you start believing it, right? So these thoughts were practically like almost consuming my mind because fear came in. And I was feeling the feeling of what it was to lose everything like I did before. And so thank God that I had some awareness of this being a strategy that the enemy has used on me for years. I've been attacked in my finances so many times, I can't even begin to tell you. And so because I realized that this is a strategy that he used to try to weaken me, I knew I had to quiet this chatter in my mind. Because if I didn't, it was going to take me over. It was going to carry me on a spiral of thoughts and started to get into negative and bad energy, right? And I was determined that that was not going to happen to me again. So what I did was I went and looked up teachings from my pastor talking about God's provision and how he's the one that provides our resources. And so this helped me to remind myself that God is my source. My business and my clients and the money that comes in there is a resource that God blesses me with. So why am I getting caught up over the resource when I know that God is my source, that he will provide a way for me? While I was listening, I knew that it quieted the chatter in my mind, because when you hear something, you can't focus on the thoughts that's coming in your mind. I took the scriptures that I was listening to and I would repeat them to myself, and I will bombard my mind with the words that's coming out of my mouth to the truth that was opposite to the lie that were coming in my thoughts. I would repeat scriptures to myself like, God will provide all my needs according to his riches and glory by Christ Jesus. God would withhold no good thing from me, that he delights in the prosperity of his people. And so I refuse to let this thing overtake me. So when our governor had given us permission to go back into the salon, I knew that I had to do something to promote business, because a lot of people, we were functioning in fear, right? We were scared. People were dying. People were getting so sick, and a lot of people were scared to go out. My business looked completely different going back in. I needed a strategy to be able to do this and also provide safety for all of my clients. So I remember that I had sent out a campaign to promote business, to invite people to come back and letting them know that I had appointment slots that were spaced out. The environment was being sanitized. I just had to give comfortability to allow people to feel safe to start coming back in, because you had people that were working at home at this time and they had to show up on screen on Zoom calls and so forth. So I sent out this campaign to drum up some business. I was barely getting any reply or response. And so here comes the thoughts coming back again, because he's trying to see, okay, how are you going to react? The enemy don't stop when he knows something is going on in our physical environment that can provoke a feeling of fear or unbelief. Because I wasn't getting the response, he was just flooding my mind with these thoughts again. And I was like, nope, we're not doing that. I remember feeling that pressure coming in again and that bombardment of thoughts again. And I stopped mid-thought and I screamed at the top of my lungs. I said, I do not care what it looks like. I trust God. I know that he is my source. God, I trust you. I know that you have to come through. You've never failed me. I may not feel that it always comes when I want it, but you always, always, always show up on time. I screamed that from the top of my lungs and everything just got quiet. And I felt something break inside of me that day that changed everything, how I dealt with this type of thought process that the enemy used to attack my mind, to discourage me, to break down my belief. I literally told the devil, I said, you're not going to keep flooding my thoughts with this fear. I know God is going to provide my needs. I knew from that point moving forward how to handle that. Really and truly, sometimes it creeps in and I'm not realizing it right away. But as soon as I recognize it, I'm like, yeah, no, we're not doing that. It's how you handle the thoughts when they show up again. Those thoughts can't stay long. They get annihilated right away. So the more you know about how to come against and resist what it is that the enemy trying to throw at you, the better equipped you are to keep pressing forward and to actually see those promises come forward in your life. And so the number one weapon that I keep in my arsenal when it comes to unbelief is disrupting thoughts with my words, opening our mouth. We can't disrupt thoughts with other thoughts. Like you can't think a new thought over the other thought and disrupt it. Not, at least not in a way that's effective. The very vibration of our voice interrupts our thoughts. It's praying, it's saying declaration of those promises over your life, hearing it over and over that you have to believe it. You have to know it's going to show up. You have this conviction inside of you that there's nothing that's going to stop God's promises from manifesting in your life. So you say them until the manifestation appears. I've heard people say to me, it can't be that simple. It can't be that easy. I assure you, there's nothing easy about speaking something with conviction, even when everything around you doesn't seem to be lining up with it. I've had to keep quiet in certain seasons because people cannot believe like you believe for what you're believing for. Only you have the ability to position yourself to be in a place of belief and trust. So you have to disrupt negative chatter in your thought life by speaking over yourself in your quiet time, being convinced in that time that you're spending to build yourself up. Open your mouth and start using the promises of God and speaking them back over yourself until you see that manifestation come. So don't get tricked to thinking that this is just mere words. There's a reason why the word says faith comes by hearing and hearing the word of God. It is not having heard it. It's not past tense. It's current. So you have to hear it and keep hearing it over and over for you to be so convicted that you can't be moved off of it. Hearing yourself speak to yourself about what God promised you and keeping the energy, emotion, feelings, and thoughts that's going to cultivate that belief for you is what it is that you need to do. So keep that in your arsenal, disrupting your thoughts with your words, disrupting your environment, the negative chatter around you with your words. Open your mouth. Think of your mind as the soil, like, ground where you plant seeds into. So the soil is your mind. The word is the seed and the word is the watering. And God is the one that brings the increase. I know we spent some time on that, but it's so necessary because unbelief is really, truly one of the biggest ones. The second reason we struggle is that we're not willing to go through the preparation and transformation that is needed to sustain and upkeep our promise. While we're waiting, we may have some areas that we need to mature and grow in. Perhaps the circumstances we're in needs to change. Maybe the environment doesn't support where God is taking you, so you need to move. It could be people around you that you can't take along for the journey. And so God needs to purge them out of your life. And that within itself is a painful process. So it's good to be excited for the promise. You should be. The question that you need to ask yourself is, am I willing to go through the preparation transformation process? In most cases, there's some restructuring that needs to go on with our character. We need to see things within ourselves that no longer serves where it is that we're going. Sometimes we're shedding off old patterns, old behaviors, old thought processes, old relationships and traumas and experiences, especially in the area of past traumas. So here we are, we've been through a traumatic event, and because we don't want to revisit the pain associated with that trauma, we avoid it at all costs, right? I know what that feels like firsthand. And so God needs you to revisit it, but not revisit it to stay in it. Revisit it so you can submit it to Him, so He can heal you through the trauma. He can enlighten you to the reason you went through it in the first place and how you grow from it and how you stand on the shoulders of that hurt and that pain that you've been through. Because most of the times, if you really think about it, the traumas that we go through, even though they're painful, the benefit that comes out on the other side when you grow from it is to help somebody else through their own traumas, that you can be relatable with people that are going through it. It's a way to give back, become a stronger person in life. It's an opportunity for growth. And sometimes that's necessary. But because we don't want to go through that temporary feeling of pain associated, we drag this brokenness into different areas of our lives. The trauma that you didn't deal with is being infiltrated into all areas of your life, future relationships, business, work environment, how you handle people, how people handle you, how you feel about yourself, how you think about yourself is being fueled by subconscious experience that you went through. In most cases, our detours are the very inconveniences that God uses to grow us up, to mature us, to develop us. It's where we learn to depend on Him more, especially in situations that we can't see ourselves out of on our own. Our back is against the wall. We don't have any more solutions to whatever the issue is. These literally are character building opportunities. And I say opportunities intentionally because we don't feel like they're opportunities, but they are. It's a way to build character and go through this transformation that's needed for where God's taking you in life. It is where we become aware of people and situations and things that need to be purged out of our lives that no longer serves us. Sometimes transformation can seem very scary. You're stepping into the unknown. But the good thing about stepping into this unknown space of transformation is because you're doing it with God. He knows everything about you. He created you. You're not responsible for your complete transformation. God is the one doing the transformation in you. You just have to be willing to allow Him to transform you, be willing to surrender to the process. And that's the part that's scary, right? But if you're not willing to go through the transformation, how are you going to be prepared for what it is that He has for you? Transformation doesn't happen one time. It's multiple pivots throughout life. It's realizing that this doesn't serve me anymore and I can do better in this area and I need God to help me be better in this area. A lot of times we're trying to do the work ourselves, and because we fail ourselves, we give up on it. We're imperfect beings. So that's why for me, I submit the transformation process to God because He said He will do the work in me. That's why you trust Him. I remember going through one of my most challenging times of my transformation. I had just moved to Arizona and my life was going in a particular direction, or so I thought. And by 3 months in, things weren't looking the way that I thought they would have been looking. And by 8 months in, everything was a complete mess and falling apart. Mind you, I had a promise spoken over me just before I moved. Actually, it was a confirming word from my pastor just before I moved. So I knew I was in the right place. I knew I was supposed to be there. But when I say everything took a turn for the worse, everything was falling apart. My God. The relationship I was in ended. I was struggling to keep a roof over my head. My finances were chaos. I'm like, God, what is happening? Am I not supposed to be here? I was confused. I had moved 7 times in 18 months. 2 of those months, I was practically homeless. I was sleeping at a friend's house. And with my business, I had to move 5 times because the owners were making changes of their own. And when you're building a client base, anytime you move, you're going to lose clients. That's just the nature of the business, because they have to travel further. It's inconvenient or whatever it is. And so I had to go through that 5 times. Talk about a feeling of chaos at that 8-month mark for me. I absolutely was confused. I didn't know what else to do, but there was something in the depths of my spirit that I knew I was supposed to stay there because God was pulling me in this transformation process. I had also gotten to the end of myself because of the frustration of repeat cycles and things that kept revisiting in my life that I was just like, I can't keep going through this. And so I was tired. I was like, God, whatever it is that you need to do in the season, I don't want to go through this again. So do whatever you must. I was willing to go through the pain of it while I was in the pain of it because I wanted to get on the other side of it successful and victorious. So I made a decision to surrender to the process. I made a decision with my free will to allow God to do this transformation inside of me because I didn't want nothing that I've experienced before to be a repeat cycle. When you think about surrender, people say, oh, God, I surrender to you. And we don't even realize that surrender is not a one and done. It's a continual progression process. I didn't like the fact that I needed to surrender. I didn't like the fact that I was going through and feeling what I was feeling, but it went from me not liking it to understanding the reason why I had to go through it, to embracing it, to being grateful about going through it because I was looking forward to what's going to come from it. I was like, there's something great that has to come out of this because I'm surrendered. I struggled to surrender prior to that, because what I thought surrender looked like, it didn't seem like it was happening in my life. I would say it, but this is the first time I felt completely submitted to it. There was nothing easy about this process. It was completely uncomfortable. I was just at the end of myself. I knew I was all in, no matter what it looked like. I was just over it. Because I was willing, because I was submitted, because I was trusting, because I was depending on God, I started seeing supernatural things show up in my life, things I've never experienced before. I had people that didn't know me, didn't know anything about my life, didn't know anything I was going through, that were prompted by God to sow resources into my life. I've never seen anything like that. I heard people talk about it, but I never experienced it for myself. Favor with different things. Like I was struggling to pay off a debt, and it was in the middle of COVID. And I remember talking to the lady, and I said, listen, I'm willing to work with you however I can. And she was willing to work with me. I remember the last 2 or 3 payments that I had to pay her, she waived it. I was like, what? Like, how is this even possible? So there were things that were showing up that were happening around me because I decided to trust God. I put my complete dependence on him, even with not being certain of all of it at the same time. I was just willing to be submissive to his process in my life. There were things like traumas that he started exposing to me, root causes to how I behaved in certain situations when I felt threatened. So that started being exposed in a way that it was very uncomfortable at first. I was just like, where is this coming from? Why am I responding, reacting, and behaving this way when this particular thing happens in my life? Oh my God, why is that happening? And he revealed it. It was something that I experienced in my childhood that affected me in my adult life and decision making. I was like, I don't want to operate from that place anymore. So I had to go through Project that. And it really happened quickly once I realized what it was and I submitted it and I decided to let God deal with it. It was like not instant, but it was a progression. And even when it resurfaces today, I'm able to keep it in its place. So there's a maturity that came from me realizing those things. You have to decide to allow God to expose the things in you that you need to grow out of. So that number 2 weapon in my arsenal I keep is the power of decision. Deciding to trust God, even when you don't understand it, but you feel convicted or convinced that he's not going to steer you wrong. You're going to come out successful on the other side. For me, it looked like taking whatever it is that I'm dealing with and holding it up against whatever God promised me. If what I'm dealing with and what I'm feeling and what I'm thinking is not in alignment, I make a decision to make a pivot, whatever is necessary. And God guides you in all of this. I'm not giving you something like a curriculum. I'm giving you an experience that I've been through and insights that God has shown me to help you to navigate your own process as God is dealing with you. So the third reason that we struggle to trust and believe God for his promises in our lives is that we react on what we see rather than what we believe. Remember earlier where I said that manifestation comes from the unseen realm to the seen realm? Well, another way that the enemy attacks us is through our 5 senses. Most people go based on what they see, hear, smell, taste, and touch. Right? So if we're operating from our 5 senses, it makes sense that this will be another tactic of the enemy to attack us based on what we're seeing in our environment rather than what we believe in God for, because the believing is a thing that's not seen. What we see physically is what's distracting us and what's moving our focus away from what it is that he promised us in the first place. Let me elaborate a little bit more on that. So think about it. We can't see our thoughts. We can't see emotions. We can't see our decisions, our ideas, our faith, our belief. We can't see these things. But every building, piece of furniture, car, meal that we have, even the very device that you're watching me on was created from the unseen realm. It was a series of thoughts that became an idea that either was drawn or sketched. Materials had to be acquired to be able to create the thing, and now we're seeing it. Before the phone, iPad, or the TV that you're watching me on appeared, it was first a thought. Everything that is manifested that we see in front of us comes from the spiritual realm first. So it makes sense why the enemy would attack this area. I want you to think how that coincides with your promise. If God promised you something, you don't see it in physical form yet. It's in the spiritual realm. Once he gave us that promise, it's already established. It's already sitting in a spiritual realm waiting for manifestation. This is why the believing is important. This is why decisions, transformation are important. This is why you need to understand that the physical thing has to come from the spiritual realm. Even with a person's intentions, right? You can't see someone's intentions. You see the action associated with the intentions because their intentions are in their mind. If we have discernment, if we have that gift of discernment, that will further show us who they are and what their intentions are towards us. So here it is. Your promise is in the spiritual realm, and you're waiting to see the manifestation of it in the physical realm. The enemy is going to attack in the area where our five senses operate. All he needs is someone's mind to make a suggestion, to cause a distraction, to say something to you different, to make a decision that impacts you, your family, your life, or whatever your situation or circumstances that's going on around you. So now this person reacts to this suggestive thought that the enemy is giving them, causing a negative impact. Now you're distracted. Now you're in fear. Now doubt seeps in. Now unbelief seeps in. Now you're not making sound decisions. Now you're not surrendering to the process of change and transformation. This is like a domino effect that happens in your life because you're not realizing, hey, I got to stand firm in believing God for the thing that he's saying that is going to manifest in my life. The enemy wants us to stay in unbelief and doubt, to keep us from accessing what it is that God has promised us. Just like we need trust and belief to see the manifestation of our promises, the enemy needs our doubt, our fear, and our unbelief to prevent us from acquiring it because it's all in how we perceive the thing. So that third weapon that I keep in my arsenal is knowing that we have a physical realm and we have a spiritual realm. And if I know that God has promised me something and it's in the spiritual realm, I'm going to hold on to what God said to me. I'm going to speak over my life. I am now staying in a place of allowing God to transform me and fighting or pushing back against unbelief. I'm believing and I'm trusting and making decisions, surrendering to the changes that come. If he said it, it has to happen. It's non-negotiable. If God makes a promise to us, it has to happen. He cannot lie. So the more we understand the tactics and the strategy of the enemy, the more we need to know and build up ourselves in our own arsenal to fight against and to resist everything that he's trying to throw our way. The more you resist, the less he messes with you. And even if the attack comes, because you know how to deal with it, it won't last long. So to wrap things up, you want to make sure that you understand that unbelief is the number one weapon. Not believing that what God promises is going to come to pass, that's the number one strategy. So you need to build up your belief. You need to have the power of decision, and you need to understand that there's a physical and a spiritual realm that is operating simultaneously. So if you're waiting for that manifestation, understand that you hold fast to the thing. It's just a matter of time before it manifests in your life. Now, while I was preparing for this video, one of the bonus things that God really put on my heart to share with you is in your prayer life, right? A lot of times we get caught up with this formal way of praying, and that's not really important. What you want to know is what God says in his word, so you can have it as ammunition, if you will, right? So you keep that in mind. Well, you just talk to him. But one of the things that I did realize that God gave me years ago, he actually took me back to notes from January of 2018. And the note was when God was teaching me how believing was important. My emotions when I was praying, how I was feeling about what I was praying was important. So I'm gonna read from this note real quick. When dealing with any prayer at all, you want to be clear in your mind and your thoughts and your emotions when you're praying. You want to be cognizant of how you're feeling in your inner being. Is the way that you feel functioning from a place of faith, or from fear. So for example, what that looks like, a family member is sick and fear hits you because you don't want anything to happen to them. So when you're praying, your feeling is like, oh my God, I don't want him to die. Your focus is on the negative thing rather than the positive thing. I know it's easier said than done, but if you're aware of it, you can be more intentional in your prayer life, because fear is to the enemy like faith is to God. Fear is the enemy's faith, if you will, right? You want your prayers to reflect from a place of faith and trust and belief. And I'm not saying any of this stuff is easy. It's just saying that I'm aware. So how am I feeling when I'm praying? Is my emotions all over the place? Is my feelings all over the place? Am I really believing that God is going to do this thing in my life? Am I connecting with it that way? Because if I'm fearful, the thing that I'm fearing is more on my mind than the thing that I'm believing God for. So you want your feelings, emotions, and thoughts in your prayer time with God to be in more alignment, so you have the environment for believing, trusting, and ultimately seeing the manifestation of whatever it is that you're praying for come to pass in your life. If while you were listening to this video, you thought about someone that it can benefit, please share, because a lot of people are out here struggling and they just need to hear something from a different perspective to be able to make the change in their life, to be encouraged and be uplifted. And please leave a comment below. Let me know what it is that you resonated with the most and what you're planning to apply to your life moving forward that's going to help you to see these promises. With that being said, see you next time.